South Africans and the continent at large were left gobsmacked when two heads of state engaged in an unprecedented exchange of words on social media. Now, amid the ongoing crisis in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda's President Paul Kagame in essence called our first citizen Cyril Ramaphosa a liar and pseudo-peacemaker. But Kagame didn't just end there. He went on to issue what many believed was a veiled threat. Our government vehemently denies it. What happened to our diplomatic channels? Are we watching the demise of South Africa's respectability on the continent? Or is this the protection of territorial sovereignty keeping us in the DRC? I'm Ziyanda Ngcobo, and welcome to your week in politics. Last weekend, news broke that at least 9 South African National Defence Force soldiers had been killed in the DRC. That number of casualties later increased to 13. But since then, there's been a flurry of questions about what exactly the SANDF is doing there, what their mandate is, and whether they were adequately equipped for combat. Over and above this, South Africans wanted to hear from the corridors of power.
They successfully halted the M23 advancement and pushed them back, preventing the rebels from achieving their objective. However, this decisive pushback at Sake came at a great cost, resulting in the loss of 13 of our gallant fighters. Regrettably, on Monday, the 27th January 2025, several long-range mortar bombs were launched towards Goma Airport, with some landing in the South African National Defence Force base, leading to the loss of 3 additional South African National Defence Force soldiers. The families of the fallen heroes have already been notified, and plans are underway to repatriate the remains of our gallant soldiers back home to South Africa. Meanwhile, M23 reported suffering heavy personnel losses and subsequently requested SAMI DRC to hold fire so they could recover the bodies of their fallen members around Sake. We consented to this request. However, SAMI DRC set conditions, including a demand for the safe passage of injured soldiers to Goma for medical treatment.
This communication from the chief of the SANDF came through on Wednesday, 4 days after the soldiers lost their lives. That same day, the president of our country finally broke his silence and released a statement extending his condolences to the families of those who lost loved ones. In the very same communication, however, Ramaphosa described the Rwandan Defence Force as a militia, which incensed President Paul Kagame.
I spoke with the president of South Africa, who sought me out to speak with me on this matter because of their involvement in Eastern Congo. And he's also there pretending to be playing a peacemaker role. And he has a force that has been fighting alongside FDLR and has been fighting the M23 on the instructions of Tshisekedi, because these are people who are not supposed to be in Congo, that these are from Rwanda, or the M23 are not Rwandans, please. These are Congolese, and one time he accepts it, then another time he says, no, part of it is yes, and then the other part is from Rwanda, and these are He keeps on going. And how do we, leaders of our own countries, accept this to go on forever and just accept that we shall be manipulated by Tshisekedi or whoever is supporting him?
Throughout its messaging, the South African government and the ANC insist that the Eastern DRC mission is one of peace, not combat. National Executive Committee member Mamuluko Kubai reinforced this message during a post-ANC Lekgotla briefing.
Firstly, if you look at the mission, it's a UN mission. So South Africa has joined UN mission, peacekeeping mission. One, in terms of funding mechanism, you'd understand that when you have a UN mission, and I see quite a lot of people publicly, they talk about funding and all that, it's done as part of a package of the UN mission. So UN will have a resolution to say we'll send a mission, peacekeeping mission, into this country, and when they do that, that's why they will do the whole package of their support, of their, even their stipend and all those things. That's why they end differently even when they go there. So a mission sent by South Africa on its own and a mission sent under UN has different categories.
Finally, on the sidelines of the Cabinet Lekgotla on Wednesday afternoon, Defence Minister Angie Motshekga gave the nation some insight into what our troops were faced with in the eastern DRC.
So we have called for a ceasefire. I can assure South Africans that our camps have not been attacked for the past 48 hours because, unfortunately for us, when we're at Goma, your DRC forces were fighting Rwandan forces over our heads. That's where we lost the 3 people. So we had to quickly communicate with M23 to say, we're not part of the battle, so don't fight over our heads. And indeed, that's why then we agreed with them that we'll host a white flag to say, we're not part of the battle, we don't want to be dragged into it.
In what some have described as a comedy of errors, the minister and her deputy, Bantu Holomisa, contradicted each other during that briefing. While Motshekga painted a picture that all was well, Holomisa lamented how the lack of investment in the SANDF leaves our soldiers on the ground vulnerable.
The defunding of the National Defence Force of South Africa led to us to say the state of readiness for our defence force. We cannot guarantee that we are ready because you are aware that we're struggling to even maintain the aircrafts, like the helicopters, which normally give cover, aerial cover, to our troops when they are under attack. So in terms of that, we hope that the Department of National Treasury and the Cabinet will rearrange some of the priorities.
Next, the presidency entered the fray, contradicting Holomisa's statements.
We need to gather those facts and understand exactly what happened. And the facts that we have so far are that fighting escalated, the Congolese army surrendered, MONUSCO on the ground has been curtailed in a way because there's been a gradual withdrawal of the MONUSCO forces on the ground. And so all of those factors have to be considered when we analyze what transpired during the battle before we can then reach conclusions. But we cannot say that it is a result of defunding or cuts in budgets that have landed us with these unfortunate fatalities that we've suffered. Fighting is taking place in a remote area. When reports come through that we've suffered fatalities, the first thing that needs to happen is to verify those reports, is to wait for accurate information from the commanders on the ground, and thereafter there is a process to then engage families who are affected, who have lost their loved ones. And so in that process, you may find that communication is delayed, not because of a lack of trying, it's because there are these processes that have to be honored.
So who exactly are South Africans expected to believe? In that same briefing on the sidelines of the Lekgotla on Wednesday afternoon, International Relations Minister Ronald Lamola continued to justify South Africa's presence in the region. He was adamant that tensions escalated on the 15th of December when warring parties failed to reach a consensus.
So it remains important for the peacekeeping forces to be on the ground, to support the work of peace, particularly also to prevent and protect the civilian life in Goma. It's a city with about 2 million people, which the international community has a responsibility to. So that is the current ongoing multilateral platforms aimed to find peace and security in the Eastern DRC. There will be a meeting tomorrow or on Friday, the SADC summit, which will further deliberate on the matter and give a way forward in terms of the decision.
But questions about whether the SANDF soldiers are actually in the region as a peacekeeping force remain. One expert and researcher in military science completely disagrees with the assertions made by our cabinet ministers.
We have to look at the mandate they had. And again, when the South African president and the defense minister goes out and say this is, and also the chief of defense go out and say this is a peacekeeping mission, it was never a peacekeeping mission. It was a mandate. It's a mission that was going there to disarm, to help the Congolese army, to assist in disarming and neutralizing the M23. So that was the mandate. And then there was some training and there were some other things as well, for protection of civilians and things like that. But it was an offensive mission.
Motshekga, who visited the region during the week, maintained that her generals on the ground in the DRC did not raise concerns about a lack of supplies. She gave assurances that our South African camps remained safe.
There's also discussions which include Rwanda, because it is alleged to be also one of the big perpetrators, and that's why we're keeping communications with them, and they've been friendly. There's been no hostility between us. It's just that at that stage when they were firing above our heads, the president did want them to say, if you're going to fire, we'll take it as a declaration of war and we'll have to defend our people.
But by the time South Africans woke up on Thursday morning, Kagame's response to the statement released by Ramaphosa hogged headlines with growing concern about the escalation of tensions between Pretoria and Kigali.
And South Africa dares even issue threats about what is likely to happen after that and so on and so forth. Of course, we will see what threats they are talking about. Maybe they should have done that exactly for which they have been issuing threats. They should have done it to clean up the mess in Eastern Congo.
In a social media post, what caused the most alarm was Kagame's last words, which were, quote, "If South Africa prefers confrontation, Rwanda will deal with the matter in that context any day," close quote. Many received this as a threat, but the government is denying this.
It's not a threat, but these are politicians. But what we should be looking at is to invest more on finding a solution in the forthcoming week, this forthcoming weekend, these talks among the leaders of SADC. Whether Kagame and Cyril Ramaphosa misunderstand each other, but at least a call which was made by President Ramaphosa to President Kagame has led to the current stable situation, where in the last 48 hours we have not had any incident.
While this might not be South Africa's first row with Rwanda, it's perhaps the first time the heads of state chose to address the simmering tensions on social media instead of through the established diplomatic channels. On X, formerly known as Twitter, Kagame in no uncertain terms called Ramaphosa a liar who was speaking in forked tongues about who he believes is responsible for the death of 13 SANDF soldiers. He believes Pretoria's statement, the only one so far, was a misrepresentation of what both presidents discussed in the two phone conversations they had this week.
For instance, President Ramaphosa told the president clearly, and I was privy to this, that he knows that it was the Congolese armed forces that shot at the South African forces. Although in his tweet, President Ramaphosa said the opposite. And then he also said that he gave a warning to the president. That did not happen. There was no warning during the phone call. He also said that the SAMI DRC was a peacekeeping force, which you have just repeated in your intro. That is also incorrect, and you need to look into that.
For their part, Rwanda's government has sidestepped questions about whether they have a direct involvement and are providing assistance to M23 rebels.
I mean, you're correct in the sense that we do understand the threat that this community faces, because we have more than 100,000 Congolese Tutsi refugees here in Rwanda. And this is the community from which the M23 originates. So the M23 say that they're fighting to regain their homelands from which they've been ejected. We have these Congolese Tutsis, not only in Rwanda, but in Uganda and in Kenya, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them. So we understand that cause, and we know the force that is the militias that are killing their people and burning their homes and stealing their property, because these are the same people who were here in 94, who did what they did in 94 in the genocide, and then fled over, they were defeated, fled over to DRC, and they have been determined in the last 30 years to come back forcefully and finish the job. So we do know, we understand what the M23 is fighting for.
Over the coming days, we anticipate that there could be further developments around the situation in Eastern DRC, especially after the Southern African Development Community's special summit held in Harare on Friday. Now, after the break, we return to issues on home soil and re-examine the relationship between the ANC and DA within the Government of National Unity. The Zumas were also back in court, and this time to show support for former President Jacob Zuma's daughter. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Thanks for staying tuned to Newzroom Afrika, channel 405. Now this week, once again, and perhaps unsurprisingly, we saw another flare-up between the two biggest parties in the Government of National Unity, that being the ANC and DA. This time, the hullabaloo was over the Expropriation Act. The DA, once again, is making threats that if it is not consulted before the signing of contentious bills, they'll have no choice but to leave the GNU.
And let me be very clear. We're not here to implement the National Democratic Revolution. That's the ANC's ideology. It's not the ideology of the Government of National Unity.
On Tuesday morning, DA leader John Steenhuisen was emphatic that his party would not take what they claim was a lack of consultation over the expropriation bill now signed into law lying down. In addition to this, the DA believes President Cyril Ramaphosa ignored legal advice from their Minister in Public Works, Dean McPherson, who raised issues of constitutionality around this piece of legislation.
If this current trend continues of simply giving a tin ear to the views, opinions, thoughts and ideas of DA ministers in government, then there really is no point us being there. We might as well be sitting in opposition in Parliament and in the country, because if our ideas aren't going to be listened to and taken on board, there really is no point in us being there. So when will we leave? When the Constitution is trashed and our economy is crashed.
Later on Tuesday afternoon, the ANC held its own briefing where it outlined the outcomes of its Lekgotla gathering at the weekend. It had very little to say about the DA's threats of withdrawing from the GNU.
This thing about leaving the Government of National Unity is a bit like, what is it, the little boy crying wolf. And I think that by the time that you really implement and there's really a wolf, you may find that nobody is listening because you've cried wolf so many times.
Besides the DA, at least 3 other coalition partners in the GNU, the IFP, Patriotic Alliance and Freedom Front Plus, are also against the Expropriation Act. But the ANC is in full support of its president, Cyril Ramaphosa.
One of the issues about the statement of intent that forms the foundation of the Government of National Unity is its foundational principles. And one of the foundational principles is the rule of law, that we must respect the Constitution and we must respect the rule of law. The President can't, after Parliament pass a law, unless it's unconstitutional, can't then say that he's not going to sign the law.
The Zumas presented a united front when the former president's daughter, Duduzile, appeared in the Durban Magistrates Court. She was in the dock for her social media posts during the 2021 July unrest. Duduzile Zuma-Sambudla faces charges related to the Terrorism Act. She was released on warning and her matter was postponed to March. Here's my colleague Linda Mnesi with that report.
The former president's daughter and MK party member of parliament, Duduzile Zuma-Sambudla, has appeared in court for allegedly inciting violence on social media during the July 2021 unrest. Over 350 people died and over 5,000 more were arrested during 8 days of riots in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal in what's been described as one of the darkest times in post-apartheid South Africa. The violence came soon after former President Jacob Zuma was jailed for defying a constitutional court order to appear before the state capture inquiry. The state is confident in its case against Zuma-Sambudla.
That we have secure evidence through investigation that support the allegation that she unlawfully and intentionally, by publishing those words, committed the crime of inciting public violence.
This is a Schedule 6 offence, placing the onus on Zuma-Sambudla to show that exceptional circumstances permit her release on bail. Her lawyer did not hold back.
It is plainly nonsensical and petty to interpret words which are used, such as, quote, "I see you," unquote, to mean that the people referred to or were influenced by my social media commentary.
Zuma-Sambudla has even threatened to legally challenge the charges at a later stage. The state didn't oppose bail, saying she's not a flight risk. It explained why it's taken so long to get the matter to court.
It's a unique case, complex in nature, in the sense that reliance on the investigation and evidence is based on social media posts. It is technical investigation. It is investigation that some of the parts of the investigative process had to be outsourced in terms of experts on social media, because SAPS doesn't have an expert in social media. Secondly, there's issue of emojis, the issue of images that needed to be interpreted by an expert in that field. There are procurement processes that needed to be followed in order to source or procure that investigative resource. Now, the process of investigating a matter therefore became protracted than we anticipated.
Both Zuma-Sambudla and her party believe it's all a political ploy.
They're so obsessed with the Zuma family. So we know that this cannot be just a case that has got any elements of credibility. This is just a political ploy. And if you think for 1 second that this is not a political ploy, just based on the players that are involved here, then I'm sure you're living in a different world, quite honestly.
Zuma-Sambudla has been released on warning, with her matter now transferred to the Durban High Court, where she will be making an appearance on the 20th of March. For Newzroom Afrika on Channel 405, I'm Linda Mnisi at the Durban Magistrates Court.
Meanwhile, outside court, scores of MK party supporters were lined up and waiting to hear what transpired inside the courtroom.
An attack to President Zuma is an attack to Mkhonto weSizwe. An attack to Duduzile Zuma is an attack to Mkhonto weSizwe.
Former President Jacob Zuma has likened his daughter's appearance in the dock to his own legal woes, which he's always maintained are a part of a larger political conspiracy.
Base beyobheka utwister ukuthi ubani bekhuluma bathola ingane laphana ethi we see you or I see you. Ake ningitshene uma ubhala ku Twitter uthi I see you, icala lelo. Niyayibona lento engishoyo? Ingane ibona umhlobo. Mhlawumbe uma ubunga qagela ukuthi nampa abantu bebulawa bo. We see you nini nibulala abantu or whatever. Angazi. Namhlanje silapha nje for lokho. Osekuqede iminyaka engaki 4.
MK Party Secretary General Floyd Chibambu says charges against Zuma-Sambudla have been brought up to suppress the growth of the MK Party.
The Pan-African Parliament represents all the parliaments of South Africa. And she's chairing one of the most influential caucuses. So in response, because they don't have politics to suppress such, they then go and invoke the laws. They abuse state power in the same way they've been doing against President Zuma.
This brings to an end this episode of This Week in Politics. There's never a dull moment in our news cycle. We'll continue to monitor the developments over the fallout over Eastern DRC and keenly analyze Cyril Ramaphosa's first State of the Nation address as the leader of the GNU, which is just days away. Let's meet again, same time next week. Thank you for watching.